Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We have been sort of a bit late, a few minutes. Actually, I'm very honored to be invited to this discussion. The COVID-19 definitely affects our life, but I'm not very enthusiastic about the new normal that everyone talks about, because I think that it entails somehow a normalization effect of what we are going to face after the pandemic, and even prolong the conditions that allow the state generally, not only in the Arab world, but broadly, in the world to exercise more power and authority. It will be doing so by different means, according to the different political systems, a different nature of society. But I think that this new normal, to normalize with what is coming, should be taken carefully, because also we have to be aware and to be able to assess as social movements and as civil society what is going on. It is very well known that the state, the modern state, or any authority generally, does not need a specific state of exception in order to extend its power. But it's good to know that there is a state of exception, and definitely many procedures have been taken in different countries, north, south, east, west, to somehow curb different civil activities and issue some laws that have been in the drawer, and now because the people are too busy keeping themselves safe, have been issued in the parliaments that did not stop functioning. And of course, you discussed before, as Ihsan told me, the issue of democratization and the future of democracy. So what I'm going to talk about today is basically frame what I see going on in the world, because what happens in the Arab world in a way or another resonates and is relevant to those, especially in Southeast Asia. People might assume, because of this notion of area studies, that areas differ from each other, but there is a thread going between the different regions and areas in the world, because of not only because of globalization, and we are facing this COVID-19 all together as a world, as humanity, but also because we are humans, and we have to remember that there are so many patterns that repeat themselves in social and political life. There is somehow an important approach to the relation between the state and society, and to the world generally. How do you look from a perspective of political science? I'm a political theorist. So from the perspective of political theory or social theory, to the world generally, how do we define politics? Is it about the matter of order, or are we all the time dealing with disorder as well, with all these structures around us? But there is a somehow disorder also in the scene. Of course, the disorder does not mean a revolution, does not mean an Occupy movement, does not mean necessarily people going on the street, dissent, but it means that within the perspective of politics, order is essential, and that's why usually people assume that political science is the study of order, while it's actually also the study of disorder. And disorder, in my definition, means that how in different systems in society and in politics, we can track some type of irregularities that take place even under the most strict orders. And these irregularities are neither positive nor negative. I mean, this is something that ideology can judge. But when it comes to knowledge, and when it comes to science, when it comes to the study in our perspective within the realm of academia or social sciences broadly, disorder and irregularities in the scene are important to trace. So when we talk about COVID-19, it's very important to see how actually what we will see in the future is not a complete shift to a new normal, but it's rather a good situation, a good opportunity to enhance the speed of changes that have been taking place before. Because number one, exceptional rules and regulations start taking place under the state of exception, which is in this case a COVID-19. It can be a war, it can be a war against terrorism. I mean, regimes and systems do not need an excuse to exercise more power if they have specific plans in different directions. But it's also a good reason to look into the dynamics that usually we ignore when we are looking at one specific topic. So you're talking about authoritarianism in the Arab world. So what about the society in the Arab world? Of course, in any society, as I said, the regimes tend to acquire more power and to take more space whenever possible, even when there is no state of exception. But when we are talking about this situation, it's also important to see how the different societies also respond and how people are aware. Social media is now a good platform for different activists and different social actors broadly and civil actors to basically monitor what is going on, and this is very important. So order and disorder or order and chaos should be redefined because it also relates to these states of exception that we go through. And chaos here does again not mean a collapse of the system, but it means the emergence of new patterns that we did not see before. And it takes us time as social scientists to start discovering the logic, the rationale of these emerging patterns until we establish a way to study them and they put them in the regularity of our understanding. We call them chaos, while some people, when they read the word, they assume that the world is falling. You know, it's like, no, it's not like that. So definitely with COVID-19, there has been a new scene, but it's very much related to the new normal, as they will call it, to basically normalize with new decisions, new procedures, new policies. The second point that I wanted to talk about is how do we usually look at the Arab world? It's a different region, and we have to know a bit about the history, which I will not go into. But the history of the Arab world is not very different from the history of other areas, with the emergence of the nation state after or during the colonial era, and with the modernization process that basically had its impact on society as well. Whether we are talking about urbanization, we are talking about a perspective of the human and culture, whether we are talking about economy and capitalism. So all these changes that took place over the last 100 to 200 years, depending on different countries, affected the formation of the new modern state that we are living in today. The authoritarianism in the Arab world is basically part of a wider phenomena of the authority of the state. So in political theory, this is basically one of our main concerns, how the state is basically acquiring its power, how the nation state is using different ideologies from the ideologies of the independence of usually socialism or nationalism to the neoliberal policies in economy that basically have offer a surface of a cultural liberalism, while actually on the ground the state is not committed to this type of level of human rights or respect of the choices of people. After a long time when we expected that coups and military intervention in politics is a matter of the past, it came back again, civil wars. So the modern state in the Arab world did not fulfill its promises, basically, and whether in terms of economic independence, political independence related to sovereignty because of globalization and the interference of the superpowers that had previous impact in the country. We see that everywhere. And also because of its failure to achieve social justice. And the democratization and democratic transition that we have witnessed in the Arab world since the 80s has been a sign that the society is also developing its own power to resist and to basically respond to the challenges that are at hand. Of course, we cannot ignore the impact of the Arab Spring, because here we used to say at the beginning of the millennium, we are going to witness a change because we have a map in front of us. There is a decrease in the level of achievement, economic crises that had an impact on the Arab world as well, with the world economic crisis, the financial crisis, and also because of the demographic gap. We have millions and millions of young people who are not achieving their potential, and the economic situation and the social circumstances and the policies and wars led to a lot of frustration. And the Arab Spring started. After the Arab Spring, we witnessed the fall basically of or the collapse of different systems. In the case of Syria, in the case of Iraq, already has been facing problems even before. In the case of Yemen and in the case of Libya. So some countries managed to sort of surf and maneuver. Morocco, Algeria. Does not mean that that the situation there is perfect, but I mean they managed to sort of respond to the wave and manage to keep their balance. Sudan also lately we had, of course, we had a second wave. The first wave in 2010, 2011, and the second wave of protests took place, but it was not noticed with the same level of even media coverage. In the case of, we had 4 countries where we had substantial movements taking the street and demanding more rights. We have the case of Algeria, we have the case of Lebanon, we have the case of Iraq even, and we have the case of Morocco, but with a very sort of limited level, and of course Sudan. So in the case of Sudan, even there has been a change in the system that some analysts want to compare with the change that took place in Egypt, but there are some similarities and there are some differences between Egypt and Sudan in this case. But so you had sort of different second wave indicators of the Arab Spring that have been dealt with, interestingly, quite wisely by different regimes as well, more or less, depending on the case, because there is that memory of the first Arab Spring. There has been processes of negotiation in Sudan after a bit of turbulence at the beginning, with some casualties and shooting on the street, but eventually the different parties reached an agreement, a bit fragile, but we will see. And in the case of Algeria, it resulted in a new president in Algeria. Was not as dramatic as the case in Egypt, but it was very interesting to see the fall of, or at least the change of this ruling scene. In the case of Lebanon, definitely it will have an impact on the long run on the situation, but it's taking time. And generally and broadly, it's not only authoritarianism that is active and renewing its pace and tempo and speed, but it's also the society and how it's responding to the changes and situation, etc. Of course, when you have a pandemic, you don't expect governments to allow, because of the pandemic, that people resist or demonstrate, or that they would take more action that is in the public sphere. The public sphere basically comes into sort of under the lockdown. It's very difficult to do so, but there have been different ways of the society responding to that. Social media has been very active, and there are some indicators that the trends on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, etc., have affected some decisions here and there, but the major decisions could not be challenged because, number one, the audience itself, the people, the masses, the people of the country are busy with their own safety and good well-being. And also because you cannot achieve the wild change only on social media. It's very important, it's very influential, At the end of the day, this is not the real public sphere, as we can call. So this sphere is important to follow and to see, but there has been also some limitations for the people to respond to the changes that are taking place. And of course, I mentioned the notion of speed. Speed is very important in understanding politics because we have different levels of speed in terms of how the policies take shape. So in under the COVID, the speed was lowered. People stayed at home, the lockdown in different sectors, etc. Of course, the disadvantage, the most disadvantaged could not afford to stay at home, and the society was split between those who could stay at home and those who had to go and work out every day because they are living on wages or on daily income. And I was very interested in reading about Malaysia and about Southeast Asia during that time because I remembered the book of The Myth of the Lady Native by Syed Hussein Alatas, who described how colonial capitalism actually portrayed the natives of Java and the Malays and portrayed them as lazy, as not productive. So there was so much of that also in the Arab world when the different countries, because people had to go out in some sectors to work, they were seen as a threat, you know. So on one hand, the government was keen that those people keep working because of the economy, etc., and started regulating it in a way. But the official announcement was that there is a lockdown, and whenever those people who are basically keeping the economy going were spotted by the media, they were accused of being the sort of semi-lazy native, you know, those who do not have enough responsibilities, those who are not minding the safety of the others if they go out and then they bring the infection to other people. And it was a very interesting portrayal of the need of the government to protect those who are in the lockdown from those people who are going out and might spread the pandemic, you know, but you are the ones who basically are allowing them to do so, because otherwise the country will, or the economy would come to a situation of a complete stop. So how this also, when you see the discourses in the media of the governments, you can see how also there is that sort of double standards and a way to promote during the COVID-19 the fact that people need the government because need the government to protect them from the public that is not aware of its own interests. And it was very interesting how this fostered an image of the citizen as irresponsible, as in need of the guidance and the control and the procedures that have been taken, etc. But at the same time, COVID-19 also in different situations in the third world, not only in the Arab world, showed the inefficiency of the state and showed clearly to the masses, rich and poor, by the way, how the public policies have been basically serving the minority and not the majority, and that the health sector has witnessed a serious crisis because it could not respond to the challenge, the sudden challenge of COVID-19. And this made definitely the governments aware of that, and there has been efforts to cover up the shortage in the services provided in hospitals. Hospitals were not enough to accommodate all these cases that started rising, especially when we reach in different countries the peak. And but also it showed the strength and the power of the civil society, because if I take the case of Egypt, where I come from, I'm Egyptian, we witnessed a strong effort by civil society to provide services for the cases of COVID-19 in different local areas. There has been a strive by civil society and NGOs to support hospitals, It has been done by different political and social groups. And people also, I mean, not only the NGOs and associations, but people started making initiatives to provide across, for example, in the case of the cities, across the cities, there has been networks to provide food for those who and meals for those who are locked with COVID and cannot go out because they are sick. They have there is a hotline in many cities to call, which is completely like social network, an initiative by people. Just go into the Facebook group, write your name, your address, how many meals you need, and people start, posting like who is in the neighborhood, who can help. It's important to see and spot that, because on the long run, this will be like the memory of the people of how not lazy they are, but on the contrary, people have been instantly very aware of the need to fill gaps, and initiatives have been taken right from day one by different members and entities in society. How this can lead later to a sense of empowerment, a sense of agency, and maybe what Asif Bayat, a very well-known sociologist, calls the non-movement, which is like that at one instance people come together, there are specific pressures exercised on the system and on the regimes, on the political regime, and then when something is achieved, when there is a shift that happens, people just spread again. They are not like the long-term social movements based on ideology, etc. So it was good actually on that level to see the reaction of society and civil society in the Arab world to COVID-19. It showed that the society is still active, that the social networks and the muscles of society are still working, and this promises in the future of new ways to deal with rising authoritarianism that also took the opportunity of COVID-19 to empower itself. Uh, the state's ultimate exercise of power is war, and war is still going on in the Arab world. So though some countries, I think it was France that took about 3 months ago an initiative to world peace, so that because COVID-19, different governments have to deal with their own issues. So France came up, I think, and called the and the head of the UN supported the initiative, but it was just for a few days as propaganda basically, and then again the different confrontations started back. I mean, nobody responded basically, and fighting did not stop for a day in the Arab world, whether we're talking about Syria or the case of Libya. And there is a renewed rising confrontation going on at the moment because of the very complexity of the relations in the Eastern Mediterranean at the moment between Egypt, Turkey, Libya, with the interference also, or with the presence of different Gulf countries in the conflicts, whether in Syria or in Libya. So the situation is getting even more complicated. So COVID-19 did not stop human beings, because we are human beings, from conducting wars, and not stop governments from taking more and more procedures to speed their plans that have been going on before. So in the case of Egypt, for example, I look at the urban politics because I'm interested in urban politics. I teach urban politics and urban sociology. So from that perspective, there has all the projects that have been going on are still going on. We have in the country for the last almost 6 years, we had plans to establish 3 new cities and the new capital. So we have New Alamein, which is in the northwestern part of the country, closer to the borders of Libya, between Alexandria and Marsa Matruh, so the northwest. We have the new capital, the new administrative capital. It does not have a specific name yet, I mean, almost like Putrajaya in Malaysia. And it has been, I think it's almost now 70%. The construction has been going on. It did not stop during the COVID-19. On the contrary, it has been, more effort has been done to continue the work. And we have Al Galala, which is in the east northern part of the country. So 3 new cities that would in total accommodate 15 million people. Who those people will be, and definitely from because of the international investment, they will be not only citizens but also foreigners. There are many projects for tourism. There is even in the case of Al Alamein, it is land going on, or carrying the potential of some of urban civil. There has been so much going on in terms of urban planning, but this urban planning, of course, is under the rule of the experts and under the supervision of the army as well. So there has been many projects to bring down the slums that have been have been seriously constructed to accommodate those who are dislocated. But at the same time, this process of dislocation was not basically a democratic one. So there was no participation of the people in the case of the decision making and the planning, and more to come in the capital. More projects of accommodate the people who are dislocated, but also the planning of the city itself. And this is one of the dimensions of activism that have been neglected for a long time in favor of more political activism. I think that urban activism generally, not only in Egypt or in the Arab world, but also in Turkey, there is a similar policy going on, where actually less voice to the people is given, and the role of the experts is dominating. And there is so much written about that. This is not going on only in the third world or in the Arab world, it's going on even in the States. So the work of Saskia Sassen, for example, as an urban sociologist, indicates that in a very famous book that I usually recommend to my students and to those who ask me about how to understand the relation between the state and land in the world today under global capitalism. The book is titled Expulsions. And Saskia Sassen explained that it is taking place not only in the third world, but also worldwide. How finance and high finance are affecting policies on the ground related to housing, and how the city is basically the hub for so many power relations that we can test and we can study and see. But at the same time, these people are invisible. They are told that this is the decision taken by the government, and the other people in the different locales and neighborhoods are told that this is for their own sake in terms of security. It's better to build houses for the less advantaged outside the city in new projects, and then clear these areas. But then these areas are again subject to global capitalist dynamics and the foreign investments and plans uh, for the most privileged, basically. So it's very interesting to see how when we are talking about the COVID-19 and the Arab world, you are expecting all the time to talk about the strategic, the political. But I think that also the dimension of urban planning in the world generally and broadly, and of course in the Arab world, because we are part of the world as well, is very interesting to look at. And I think also that the same was witnessed in Malaysia, and we have different studies that talk about the urban changes in Malaysia as well. and what they reflect in terms of global impact and global influence, and the impact on the citizens and the local communities, etc. So how can we foresee, how can we anticipate what is to come after COVID-19 in the Arab world? Not different from the rest of the world, basically. We expect more conflict to take place. Parliaments have been working to issue laws that have been waiting, as I said. So those who are interested to know how the future looks like should look into the laws that have been issued in the last 3-4 months to see how the government managed different governments managed to maneuver this sort of over occupation with personal safety to pass laws and map the future for in different sectors, economic, social, etc. In the case of Egypt, for example, the last few weeks witnessed more control over the social media. TikTok application has been subject to scrutiny, and some people have been accused of immoral conduct, and girls who have been using TikTok for dancing and for doing some performances that basically are seen as inappropriate, etc., have been arrested. So it's not about that. Usually, when you are in the realm of political analysis, you look and say, okay, is this the best time to do that when we have the COVID and we are facing such dilemmas? So you look and say, okay, maybe this is like an introduction to new restrictions. The same has taken place in Turkey 2 days ago because of the inappropriate comments on a tweet or on social media on the family of the president. There has been a concern about the impact of social media on public virtues, and an attempt to basically control it more because it might threaten the social texture, etc. So it's very interesting to compare the cases. I mean, Turkey and Cairo and Istanbul are having their own political issues now, and they have been having them for a long time. And there is a confrontation maybe ahead in Libya. But it's interesting also from a political analysis perspective to see the similarities in some reactions of different governments towards the situation in their own different realms under the COVID. And the similarities are very interesting to see because they allow us to sort of take a look at how the systems functions apart from the different cases in a specific region or generally and broadly, and how also what is taking place in one area in the world can also have an impact on other areas, or what lessons basically can we learn. I think that in the after COVID-19, because we are not separated from the rest of the world, I was interested in the last few weeks in reading about something that is called nodal governance. It's like if the scene is changing from in terms of urban politics, in terms of regional balances between the different states, the region in the Mediterranean, the Arab region broadly, the rise of the influence of the Gulf states in the Arab regional system in an unprecedented way, the crisis that different countries that used to be the main actors in the region, and how this will impact and reshape the Arab politics as reflected maybe in different interventions of different countries in Syria, Iraq, and Libya, but also as reflected in the Arab League, and how it might be needed to basically orchestrate different policies, etc. What is important to look at is also how different governments will deal with the notion of governance and government. And this notion of nodal government means that because of sovereignties, changes in the theories of sovereignty, that sovereignty is not like a block, but in terms of the territory and in terms of control and order and disorder, going back to the first part of my talk, we will witness basically a shift in effective sovereignty. And hence, we have to look at different parts and different sectors and different spaces from the perspective of government in a nodal way. And this nodal governance would mean that we are not witnessing like a tree or a pyramid, but rather a nodal way of exercising power, which reminds us of the opposite counter rhizomic way of resistance that was discussed by Deleuze, who is a French philosopher. So when he's talking about rhizomic, the rhizomes, he's talking about the irregularity. He's talking about how different movements can actually act not only in terms of networks but in terms of rhizomes. So there is a high degree of irregularity in responding to the different policies or the different modes of exercising power by the authorities and by the hegemonic powers, basically. So this is a new thing to look into, that we expect to look at the surface and see things, but actually the Arab Spring taught us that what is under the surface, not underground as movements or violence or something, no, but basically what is under the surface is also important to look into, but also how this will impact because of the Arab Spring and because it took everyone by surprise, even if it had its own indicators earlier. Definitely, the Arab states are changing their strategies in dealing with the political space and in dealing with space and territory generally, and the way they exercise their sovereignty in terms of the domestic politics, but also in terms of how we are part of the conflict broadly in the world between the superpowers or the multipolar system powers that are in our region functioning, especially with the rise of the Chinese factor in different countries. The Chinese have a great rising role in different projects, economic projects, not yet very clearly political, but economically they have been targeting the Middle East and the Arab world in the last 10 or 15 years or so. We also will witness in the coming years, or we are witnessing now, but it will have an impact in the coming years on the power of the state and the way it will use different crises and conflicts to foster its grip. In the case of the wars of over water in the region, in Jordan, in the occupied territories, in the case of the ongoing conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia regarding the Nile because of the dam that will affect and decrease the share of Egypt and Sudan of the water of the Nile, a big dam built in Ethiopia. So the future of authoritarianism usually is related and very much linked with the future of economy and with the future of real crises or taking natural disasters or unprecedented circumstances like COVID-19 to empower the regimes and exercise more power and planning for the future. So this is all in all what I wanted to say today. Maybe the questions will highlight more. Yes, last point that I wanted to mention is that looking at the Arab world, but also this is something general for the security sector globally, generally, is that we are going into the era of we had this before, but it's now increasing the era of hybrid securitization. So it's not only about the political realm that we look into when we want to foresee the situation of democracy and authoritarianism, but it's also the security sector and how the exercise of sovereignty is done in day-to-day life, in everyday life on the ground. Whether it's boots on the ground in terms of borders and regional wars, or whether it's securitization of the public sphere and militarization, rising military urbanism. So this is also something that is of my interest, and I've been reading about that. You will find that laws organizing the civil and public sphere are very much informed by security concerns. So you have to look into the exercise of securitization and to understand this hybridization of security globally, to be able to look into how the scene looks in cities and on the ground and in everyday life. This is also authoritarianism and politics. It's not only about elections and political parties. So this is one of the concerns also for the future, and there is an increasing and very speedy hybridization of security and hybridization of war in the region, with the rise of the role of militias, of the role of mercenaries. Of course, I count ISIS as mercenary, and I also count Wagner and Blackwater as mercenary, but they have good names. I mean, they call themselves public no, I'm sorry, private military corporations, PMCs, and they are under the law in a way. But I don't look into the legal frame, but rather in the function and how this will have an impact on the regular armies that we have since 2003. We have witnessed the presence of Blackwater in maybe even earlier than that, the phenomena of mercenaries in our 20th century did not disappear, but it had different shapes, especially in Africa. And now we have these hundreds and hundreds and thousands now of PMCs functioning in the global sphere. How this will have an impact on our definition of war, not only in terms of technology, but also when we talk about hybrid wars, but also in terms of hybrid militarism, but also in terms of the relation between the regular and irregular combats and the military operations, etc. And we have a history behind us of that now. It's almost 2 decades since we have been sort of seeing this phenomena emerging and its impact on international scene, and also the efforts to control this phenomena and to we have on one hand a treaty for the criminalization of the use of mercenaries, but on the other hand, since 2008, we have witnessed an attempt to basically regulate the private military corporations in a way, especially in a Montreux agreement in Switzerland, to create a code of conduct for these companies, because they are companies, and we are witnessing more and more the commercialization of the security and the commercialization of violence. So how this will have an impact also on the political scene broadly, this is a question actually to be asked not only in the Arab world, but also in the world at large. In the case of Afghanistan, in the case of other conflicts, how this phenomena will have an impact, because it will definitely corrode the civil with the rise of the irregular non-civil. And this definitely will have an impact on the political regimes, on political culture, on political freedoms. I mean, it's like a wider circle, and all these variables basically mirror their impact on each other. But to close with a more optimistic note, I think that COVID-19 also proved that people under such circumstances manage to network and manage to keep their collective agency, though not in the political domain during COVID-19 specifically, but the fact that we have a strong society is very important, and the fact that such crises basically indicate to us or highlight to us the ability of society to act Even if this action is not political, there is always a potential for this action to become part of the agency of citizens broadly. And I think this is the optimistic note I want to end with, and look forward to your questions and comments.